So I did a search and I said, what are the characteristics of toxic environments or unhealthy or emotionally unhealthy environment, right? And I found this list of 15 things. I looked at this list and I was like, oh no, we're doing all of them. And so I called him, I read it to him, and I was like, babe, tell me what this sounds like. And he's like, oh, this sounds like the business.
There are 3 principles that were preached like the gospel every single conference, in almost every single podcast episode that the training team put out. The 3 most powerful principles are submission, unity, and the power of the spoken word. You know, that, like, literally gospel, like that, every single,
This is how you succeed.
In today's interview, I am interviewing my friends Kathy and Noble Gibbens. Now, if you caught my recent large video about MLMs, at the end, I mentioned that there would be a follow-up interview. If you have not seen that video, that's fine. You still can watch this interview and get a lot out of it. But it would be helpful if you did watch it, as it will help explain certain things that are going to be said and explained in this video. There are tens of thousands of MLMs in the world. Many of you watching probably have their products in your house as we speak, as you're watching this video. I know I do. But Kathy and Noble were in a very popular MLM for over 20 years, and they were very successful at it. When I was doing my research for the other video, I got in touch with Kathy, and she was phenomenal, you guys. She has a ministry on her own. She teaches about logic and critical thinking. Her husband teaches about emotional intelligence. And I think that has a lot to do with God's providence, because they are where they're at now because of their experience in their MLM. Now, I want to be very clear about something. We are not hammers looking for nails. We don't want to come off as shaming anybody or being bitter or angry. We're really not. This is about information. This is about growth. This is about knowledge. This is about knowing what this is, and that there's deeper layers to these institutions than what most people realize. But I think there's a particular audience that we are trying to reach with compassion, grace, but also firmness and fairness. This interview might be slightly different than a few that I've done before. It is going to be slightly longer. I wanted them to share what they thought was important for you guys to hear. We talk about their success in their MLM. We even talk about what are some good things they learned in their MLM that they can still apply today. They share about how they obtained success within their MLM and at what cost. They share about the spiritual elements that were taught to them through their MLM and how it was really muddy for them spiritually speaking. They share their story of how they got into their MLM, but also what it was that tipped them off that something was wrong. There is one thing to keep in mind that I should let you guys know of throughout this whole interview that I'm really annoyed with. The whole time during my interview, my microphone was not plugged in. You know, it's usually my camera that doesn't know how to camera. Today, my microphone didn't know how to microphone. Yeah, I'm talking to you. So my apologies for that as you're listening, the audio quality may not be as good as what you're used to, but it's still a wonderful interview. Everything that was said was still picked up and you can hear us clearly, but I just thought I'd let you know. There are so many really good nuggets of information that both Kathy and Noble share in this interview, and I hope that no matter where you stand, whether you're anti-MLM, whether you're a little neutral, you're like, what is this thing? Or if you're in an MLM and you're curious, I'm very happy that you're watching this video. And I would ask that you watch the whole thing and keep in mind that Kathy and Noble are really great resources in this regard as well. All of their information I will be leaving in the description. If you have any further questions about this, maybe there's something specific that they can answer for you, they would love to help. So with all that being said, I hope that you enjoy this interview. All right, everybody, I'm really excited for this interview today. I want to introduce you to two of my friends, Kathy and Noble Gibbens. You guys know why I'm having them on today. Kathy and Noble, I want to thank you guys so much for coming on my channel.
Well, thank you for having us. We're super excited to be here.
Super stoked, ladies. Super stoked.
He's a very animated person. No wonder you did so well in MLMs.
No idea.
Let's go ahead and I am going to give you guys the floor. I want y'all to introduce yourselves. What is your story and how did you get into your MLM?
Go ahead. Let's you start.
Okay, so I was in the military at 82nd Airborne Division, just gotten to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And so probably 23, 24, just got done with Ranger School, just got done airborne school, jumping out of airplanes, and had been at my unit for maybe 3 months, and second lieutenant, infantry officer, and walk into the commissary deal where there's a food court for lunch or whatever, and there's an NCO, non-commissioned officer who kind of bumped into me. And in the 82nd Airborne Division, you wear red berets, so I knew he was in my similar unit. So there's obviously immediately a connection. He's like, "Hey, Lieutenant, how you doing? Hey, great, Sergeant, what's going on?" And he's he's like, "Hey, man." Essentially, the conversation was like, it was something to the effect of, "Do you keep your options open? Have you ever thought about improving your financial situation or your finances or something to that effect?" And I'm like, "Yeah, dude, absolutely." Again, just brand new in the military, in the Army, second lieutenants do not make, a truckload of finances. And so, as a provider, right, for my family, I want to make sure I'm providing the best. So I'm like, "Yeah, of course." He's like, "Okay, well, I want to connect you with a guy who's coaching me, who's also my same, went to the same college I did, right? To West Point. I went to West Point. He's like, "Hey, my business coach went to West Point." So again, that's another immediate connection.
Relatability. Yeah.
Relatability. And I would say, so my personality trusts people implicitly. Well, the more connections that you make with me, number one, 82nd Airborne Division, right? And the second one was West Point. Not a lot of people go to that school. So, and I know obviously, there's a huge vetting and selection process. I also implicitly trust, again, this is not super wise now, me knowing all this stuff, but implicitly I trust West Pointers too, right? But again, I know that not everyone, right, is trustworthy necessarily, even at that school. And so, but anyway, so he's 2-0 with me. Like he's an 82nd Airborne Division guy. He knows a West Pointer. And I'm like, "Yeah, dude, I'd love to meet a West Point guy who's doing well financially." And he said, "Oh man, he's financially independent at age like 29 or 30. And I'm like, "Crap, I've never met anybody that's financially independent, period, let alone at 29 or 30. And so I'm like super open. And side note, now didn't discover this until 20 years later, 25 years later. At the time, I was already very emotionally needy, a people pleaser addict, toxic positivity, emotionally codependent, name an emotional dysfunction. And I was strong into lots of dysfunctions. And so, which is why I did well at West Point, in the Army, in the 82nd Airborne Division, very much a rule follower, because I want to know how to get good head rubs, right? Get my head pat, getting my Scooby snacks. And so my emotional Scooby snacks, so I would perform very well. Sat down with this couple, this West Point, and it was a couple, it was husband and wife, which was great relatability, right? So boom, hey, bring your wife with you. Okay, great. So got to meet this couple, and sure enough, they weren't 30 at the time, but maybe 40 at the time,
30s.
maybe
Early mid 30s.
And so they'd already been financially independent for a handful of years, and we sat down with him, and he's cool as a cucumber. This guy, cool as pond water, calm as pond water, and incredibly smart dude. Majored in, I don't remember, mechanical engineering, or just super smart, big brain guy, financial whiz. And so I walked in with zero skepticism, and not only did I walk in with zero skepticism, I was like, already my people pleasing addiction in full rage was like, how can I get an opportunity to stay connected to this guy? right? And like first session, I'm already trying to emotionally jump through hoops to get this guy to like us, to get this guy to take us under his wing. And he hasn't even opened his mouth, right? Like, so, and again, I wasn't aware of any of that, but that's what was going on under the surface. And so that, and from there it was, I mean, it, and them being, no, because they're 10 years older than us.
Yeah.
So that they're 10 years older than us. So, you know, and also here's another little side note. As a Gen X guy, my generation, right, we were raised, you respect your elders, right? If they're older than you, you should respect them. So they're 10 years older than me. They're financially independent. He went to West Point. He was an infantry officer, just like, so like there could not be almost more relatability than what the scenario, it was literally the perfect, I don't know, storm is the right, but it was the moons aligned. And from there we got in business and what was your thoughts on that?
And we worked very hard and we were very successful. Within a few years, we had replaced his income, my income. And so by the age of 27, I was able to achieve the big dream. I was able to leave my job, and where, you know, the business had completely replaced my income. And then by the time he was 30, he was able to walk away from his job as well. And so here we were, kind of the poster children for this system for the business of success and what that looked like. And I just want to give a quick caveat for those, you know, people who are watching, because I know, especially if you're already in an MLM, I know, because this was us, we were in for 23 years, something like that, a long time. Successful. You know, we had replaced our income. We were speaking on the stages. We were doing all the things. And I just want to say, I think this is important for, if you're in that position and you're listening to this, to just know a couple things. Number one, we told Melissa specifically, we don't want to talk about company names because I feel like it doesn't matter. It's not important. And what we tend to do is we tend to say, oh, well, that's just them and that's not us. That's just them and that's not us. And that's not helpful, right? That's not helpful, because for us, the important thing that we want to share are the reasons why what we found eventually, what we eventually found. So we're going to get to that in a minute. The second thing that I really feel like is important for me to tell you is that, Melissa, we're not here because we're angry. We're not here because we're bitter. We're not here because we were not successful. We're not here because we're like anti-MLMers or anything like that. We're here because we eventually saw some things, and I'll tell you how we got to that point. We eventually saw some things that we realized, oh my goodness, these are very unhealthy practices. And we didn't know it, but we had been doing those things for 20 plus years with the best of intentions and with the best of hearts. And so what had happened is, here we had been building our business, right? We've been doing this thing. It was our ministry. It was our whole life. This is what we had spent 2+ decades doing, right? During our 20s and 30s and into our 40s. And we eventually hit a point where we personally were not doing well. And we started going through some counseling for just ourselves, for personally, for ourselves, for marriage, for all these things. And we got introduced to this little thing called feelings and emotions and emotional intelligence and emotional health. And we started to have these realizations of, oh my goodness, this is what it looks like to be emotionally and mentally healthy. But we're doing these things. We're doing these things in our business. We're doing these things with the team that we're leading. We're teaching these things. We started to read books. Like one of the books that I'll never forget, I read, it was Changes That Heal by Dr. Henry Cloud. And I think I underlined almost every single page in that book, because I was like, oh my goodness, all of these things that he's saying are unhealthy, we're doing. Yeah. We're doing in this business, and we're teaching, and this is awful. Oh my goodness, what are we going to do? Right? So that kind of catches you up. I know that was a brief way to sum up 20 plus years, but that's kind of where we were when we started to realize that some of these things that we have just been taught were success principles, were people skills, are actually manipulative and controlling. And this is not a good environment. And our eyes were open to it.
Let's go ahead and let's explore that a little bit more. So I really want to emphasize what you said about, not being like anti-MLMers. I really love that because there's a focal point that you guys have that's very unique because you spent 20 years in, you were very successful, which we'll get to in just a second, but you're also out on the other end, not, like hammers looking for nails. You know what I mean? You're trying to help. Now, starting with that, let me ask, what were some good things about your experience in the MLM and the actual MLM itself? Though we're not mentioning names, but maybe the model, just good things in general. Let's start with that.
So here are some off the top of the dome. So one is it I would argue, so I'll speak from my experience. So my experience, it forced me out of my comfort zone. Even though I'm a people guy and talking to people, shocking, is not hard for me. I didn't have the skills. I didn't have the tools to learn how to do that. So I learned how to get out of my comfort zone. I learned some people skills and some tools to connect more effectively with people. Now, some of that was borderline manipulative, but I learned that after the fact. But again, getting out of my comfort zone and some people skills. And it also gave me a truckload of reps to be successful in any business, I would argue, but especially, MLMs, you got to have truckloads of reps. So I got to a point where...
What do you mean when you say truckloads?
I was
reps?
just going to ask. Thank you, Kathy. Yeah.
I saw your face.
So what I mean by that is I got to a point where I was getting 4 to 5 phone numbers every single day, 7 days a week for 5 years straight. So
meeting people to try to talk to them about the business, right?
Yeah, this is pre-social media days. So this is old school, literally getting names and phone numbers, meeting them in person at the grocery store, at the gym, you think about that, you got to develop a certain level of skill to walk away with 4 to 5 phone numbers every single day. I was probably meeting 10 people, connecting with 10 people a day to get 4 to 5 phone numbers from. So anyway, so a lot of repetitions, right? A lot of practice. And also a skill that's incredibly important when you own your own business and whatever kind of entrepreneurship that somebody might get into, you gotta reframe failure. Well, as a people pleaser addict, it took quite a while to get to the point where I was really willing to face that rejection over and over and over again. But because I started to do it so frequently, it desensitized me from that feeling, and I was able to reframe it and then ultimately get good at it. So that's something. The other thing I learned was the important. This is a big one in the MLM world. But it's a good one though. It's a good one. But a lot of MLMs do this, and it's great. Is self-development, right? The importance of working on yourself, reading books, listening to podcasts. Even though our particular training team did not want us listening to any podcasts outside of their own so that they could control the narrative more. That's a side note. But the point, a good point, was just making personal growth and development a priority and part of the DNA of the organization and of growth and of business. So that was another huge one. And the other thing I would say, last thing is, the way we particularly built our particular business was together. There were some people that built it, just the wife or just the husband. For us, they really strongly encouraged, hey, look, to work together, which again, in some cases is a great thing. Some scenarios, maybe it's not a great thing, but for us, it ended up being a really good thing.
Yeah, we learned people skills, which some of them are really great. Some of them that we learned were a little manipulative, but that's great. People skills, public speaking skills. We learned how to teach. We learned how to present. We learned ownership mindset, right? So there was a lot of good. There was a lot of good things that we learned in that environment.
Yeah, and I want to emphasize that those are intrinsically good things, right? I mean, even if it was outside in a secular space, there are good things that are what I kind of try to put it where it's true, right? Like it correlates with reality. Like these are intrinsically good things, and teaching them and learning them is a good thing. I have a follow-up question. Maybe it's because I've been doing a lot of this research, but I've been listening to a lot of people coming out of MLMs. And one of the things that they said, and I'm interested in what you said, Noble, is that they really encouraged you to work together. I find that that's really big in a lot of MLMs for some reason. And I think it's because they want you all in. Is there a reason why you would think after the fact that they would want you both together as a team?
Yes.
Okay.
Specifically is that we found that if one was in and the other was not, there would be a lot of times tension in the marriage or in the relationship because one person is doing all this stuff, right? They're working, they're coming to meetings, they're out talking to people, there's a whole list of things that they're doing. They're investing money or spending money, right? They're doing these things. And if the other person isn't also on board, it's going to create tension. And if there's tension here, say he's the one who's trying to build the business and I'm not on board, he's not going to be able to build the business, right? Eventually it's going to drag on him. And so it ends up, the person kind of peters away. So the way to really have somebody all in is to have both of the couples all in.
One of the questions that we would ask actually in one of the first or second, we call them meet and greets, or part of the process is how do you all make decisions in your family, so that we could identify who's the decision maker. Now, of course, the guy would have most time, well, I'm the decision maker. A lot of times we knew that it was more often than not, the wife is going to affect or influence that husband to a great degree. So just like Kathy said, if we're able to get them both on board, the chances of one of them flipping the script is going to be a lot less.
And here's the thing that's really hard to quantify that I've been thinking about and praying about, how can we communicate this well, is most of the things that we did are gonna sound good. And we had a way of making it sound good. So the way that we would answer this is, well, we want couples to work together. We want families to be together, right? It's bringing families together. It's something we do. Like, it was very family oriented, which is wonderful. And so everything, all the things that we're gonna say sounds good until it's not good anymore. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, it's good marketing.
It's very good. It's very good marketing, and it's true until it starts to get to be manipulative. And that's the thing that's so hard, because it's very easy to defend that. It's very easy. We would teach people how to overcome objections. We could teach all this stuff on how to reply to things in a way that sounds good, that brings down your defenses. But when you dig a little bit, and the end result that it has in people's life, or that it can have in people's life, is that it can be controlling and manipulative. And we had no idea. For us, we felt like this was our ministry. We truly felt like we were helping people. We felt like we were trying to bring good things to people's life. And that was our whole intention behind it. And so when people would come at us and say whatever they were going to say, have objections to it, we were like, no. And most of the people, of course, in our experience, there were a few shady people every now and then, but most of the people had good hearts and had good intentions. And this is one of the things that makes it so hard, is because these aren't like bad people out to hurt other people. These are actually people who care, and they really believe that what they're doing is really good and helpful. And in some ways it is, until it gets to a certain point, and then it kind of goes over the line. And the reason that you get to this point where it goes over the line is because somebody asked me one time, do you think that they're doing these things on purpose? And I said, no. For most people, no, I don't. I think what happened is, at some point in the history of the business, they stumbled on these principles that worked, and it got success. And so they're like, well, let's just do more of it. If this works, let's do more of it. And so we developed this whole system of working with people in a way that worked, i.e. we got people in business and were able to grow our businesses. not realizing, oh my goodness, that's actually manipulative or whatever. And there's names for them. That was one of the things that I have learned is, oh, these things that we've been doing, there's names for it. It's called reciprocity. It's called love bombing. It's called, all these different things. They actually have names, and we were doing it, but we were so slick with it that you didn't know that we were doing it unless you knew, right? And that might sound hard to communicate and differentiate, but I think that that's important to know and important to say.
And one other huge thought here is that make MLMs so incredibly powerful and attractive and almost can be a mechanism to lower people's sensitivities to or alarms for some of these things. And that is the power of community. Yeah. Especially in the last 5-8 years, however long COVID's been around, right? The social isolation and a huge part of mental and emotional health is one's tribe, right? One's social tribe, social community, social support network that's a psychologist, that's a well-known fact. And so when folks are struggling to find friends and make connections, well, if they join an MLM, you instantly have a support network and friends that can be oxygen to a lot of people that struggle with connecting with other people.
And so here's an example, right? Because I thought we need to bring some examples of some of what this sounds like. So when somebody would get started in business, when they would launch their business, we had this thing that we called a 90-day honeymoon period. And basically our whole goal for the first 90 days, essentially the way that we would view it is they could do no wrong, and we were here to serve them as much as we could for the first 90 days that they were in business. We wanted to serve them more than they've ever been served by anybody else in their life, right? And that sounds wonderful. That's a wonderful thing to do, except it's a tactic called reciprocity and love bombing, where I give to you, I'm really doing this because I want to get something back. Because if I'm the person that has served you the most in your life, how could you walk away from me? I have now created this dynamic in our relationship that you kind of owe me. And not only that, but you love me and you want more of this. Do you see all that? But that's not how we were taught. We were taught this is how you serve people. We're doing what the Bible says. We're serving. We're going above and beyond. Nobody else will do this in their life. So that's just one small, like I have many I could give you. That's just one example of it all sounds good until it's not good anymore.
Yeah. And one thing, you guys haven't seen the video yet because at the time of this recording, the big video that I did about MLMs hasn't been released yet. And one thing that I end the whole video with is something that a good friend of mine always says, is that when you know better, you do better. And you can either do better or repress it and just keep going down the path that you're going in that regard. Now, that's so much stuff to unpack with that. Now let's get into something else. When you guys were actually in your MLM, this is important because a lot of people, the vast majority, are down there at the bottom of the pyramid, so to speak. They don't make a lot of money. They're not part of the 1%. You guys were an exception. And I would love to hear about the success that you achieved in your MLM, how rare that is, and how you did it.
So here's this is all coming back.
We had objections to that. We could answer this question. Do you want which answer do you want?
So I'm going to give you both answers.
Yeah.
So we would hear that's common, right? Mm-hmm. Well, you're at the top, Noble. So
how many people are really successful?
So it's easy for you to say how many people are really successful. And there's a couple responses that we would say. We would say a couple things. Number one is, well, Melissa, 100% of the people that want to be successful are. Right? That's what.
Well, I can immediately see I can hear my seminary professor in my head right now. Dr. Mauser, he's in my head. I can see the fallacy in that logic. Like, right away.
Know that at the time.
100%. We didn't.
He wants to be successful. So what am I doing wrong? Like, that's the very obvious.
Anybody who wasn't successful, it was on them. They just hadn't worked hard enough.
Exactly.
You can't point,
Yes, exactly.
You can't point the finger at the model or the business or anything like that. It's on them. If you want it bad enough, you can be successful, right?
Yes.
That's kind of the messaging.
Right.
Your fault.
Right.
Sounds like a particular Christian movement I know of.
Right. 100%. So that's one thing that we would say, one response. The second response was, well, Melissa, like, let's talk corporate America. How many CEOs are there? Well, there's one. How many entry-level employees are there? There's way more people at the lower bottom of the pyramid in corporate America than there are at the top. So yes, does it resemble corporate America just like your job? Absolutely. Right. And so that would be another way that we would respond. Anyway, so how successful were we? So we reached, it's like the top 0.01%. So of the 24 years that we were in business, we made six figures for at least 17 to 18 of those 24 years. And we went on, there's these particular trips that they would send all the high level performers at every year. And we would go to those, we went on those trips for 17, 18 years. And we spoke, because we were so young, there's not many 30-year-old financially independent people walking around. Well, and that's a whole nother thing. But so we had a big retirement party and stuff. Again, when I retired at 30 years old, and which is again a whole nother misnomer, but that's another conversation. But we because we're so young, we were speaking all over the world. To thousands of people. We spoke all over the place. 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 people on a fairly regular basis. We would travel around the country and the world doing that. And so and we trained, and we were,
and we loved it. We had a great time.
Yeah, the audio, they call them audios, the CD, this is old school again, CDs and stuff. Our podcasts were very popular, right? Because we're the young kind of kids and stuff at the time. And so anyway, so we did very well, built a pretty decent sized team. And so,
And so one of the questions that I feel like needs to be asked or answered behind that is, how did you keep people in for years and years and years who were not making money? Because this is a very real thing in these MLM businesses. You're right. There's a lot of people who don't make money, who they lose money. And how do you keep them in and engaged? And there's a couple things. So one, you have to stay positive, right?
Oh,
This is it.
Waiting for you to say it.
Yes. So
The mindset
is a huge one. So and speak what you want, the power of the spoken words, all these things. So you almost couldn't even say, I'm not making money, I'm losing money, this is terrible. No, you got to speak what you want, right? We would correct people and tell them there's a positive way to say everything. This was the whole thing. So number one, you weren't allowed to even express it unless it was in your own thoughts, and you don't dare say it out loud because that's frowned upon. We don't say negative. And there were even rules. You can't even say anything negative to somebody who's your cross line or under you on your team. You could only say negative things to your coach, right? Because they're the only ones that can help you. So it was controlled. So nobody's hearing anybody else say anything negative about their experience in the company. And it was always, it's coming. You got to have faith, right? You just got to have faith that what you're doing, if you do the work hard enough, long enough, it's going to happen for you. Look, it happened for us. This is what we did. And it was always story. So you're telling your story about your dream, struggle, your victory, and how you overcame things and overcame the hard things. And we were just always keeping people holding on, right? Just keeping them holding on. Yeah. The other way that we did it is we made it a mission, right? You give it a bigger purpose. So it wasn't just about building our business, our MLM business. It was about, we were saving the world. People are getting saved. People would come to the conferences. They come to our meetings. I could give you a list of all the people who got saved because we built this business. So now, and that's true. I mean, this is true. There were people whose lives were changed, who are Christians today, who are in church because we met them got them into this business, and they got saved. And so how could you leave that?
Throughout everything you're saying, I want to remind the audience that you haven't seen my video yet. And there's so many things that are 100% paralleled with what you're saying and the hundreds of other people that I've talked with and the research. That, and this is my point in part 4, which you haven't watched yet, is that it's what undergirds it and what really keeps you in is a lot of people think they're doing God's work. They think that they think that it's spiritual. And I'm like, man, nobody touches on that. So that's really interesting. Yes to all of that. I agree with that. You see that.
And not everybody, right? There's people in these MLMs that are not Christian, that are not, but they often will have a higher purpose, whether it's we want to build a hospital or we want to help kids in some way.
They all have the same mindset mentality though, no matter what, it seems.
And that keeps people holding on for years. Years.
Well, and so connected to those two things is, and again, I didn't know any of this until going through my own emotional intelligence, emotional growth journey 5 years ago. Two of the most powerful emotions out in the human experience are hope and fear. And they mastered both of those. I say we, because we were
part of it.
We were very much part of it. The hope, like, Melissa, look at us. Like, I'm telling you, you can do this. We did it. Like, yes, it took time. Yes, it was hard work. We busted our butt. But if you do what we did, you can have what we have, right? So that hope of like, oh, crap, okay, well, Noble and Kathy are real people. They're not fake. I can go to their house. I can see how they live. It's not some, celebrity in the sky kind of thing. So the hope. And then the fear is, do you want to be miserable at your job the rest of your life and not provide for your family? Really? Like, do you not want to earn the respect of your children? Like, and you want to, for a dude to hear that line, that is like soul, like, wait, what do you mean not getting the respect of my family and not providing for those two words to a man, providing and respect are huge, massive words to a dude. And so those two things, hope and fear, man, we had both of those hooks in, and like, it's like the hooks in the nose, right? You carry that big giant steer wherever you want to take it, as long as you got that hope and fear, you can, but like, pandemic, right? That talk about a global experiment, right? Vax, not vax, mask, not mask. Fear is a powerful control tool.
Yeah, there were a lot of, now I teach logical fallacies, right? There were a lot of appeals to emotional appeals that were happening that we did not know or recognize. Another one was there would be stories about people who left the business and how their life fell apart and they got divorced and they were broke, and everything about anybody who left the business was terrible. And the only alternative was to stay here because there's nothing else out there that's as good as what we have here, right? That was the messaging. That was what we said. That was what we heard. Those were the stories. And, it's so interesting. So the way that we ended up getting out, I don't think I ever told you. So the messaging is very controlled, right? Messaging is very controlled. And like Noble had said, it was very discouraged. You don't listen to other podcasts. There's a recommended book list that you can listen to. You only listen to our audios, that kind of thing. And what you for sure don't do is go search on the internet. The last thing you want to do is search on the internet. The internet is the bathroom wall. It's basically, would you take advice off the bathroom wall at Buc-ee's? No, of course not, right? All this stuff. So you don't do that. That is the forbidden land, is to go look. So when we started to get to this place where I'm like, oh my goodness, I think we're doing some stuff that's kind of bad. For the first time in like 22 years, I almost whispered it to Noble, I'm going to do an internet search. And I went and I like,
the Jehovah's Witness who's just like, I don't think this is true.
I was like hiding under the covers and I looked it up. I looked up stuff and I started to read. And I thought, oh my gosh, what they're saying is true. Like there's true stuff. The stuff on the internet is really real. But I didn't want to be emotional about it because now we're in this conflict period of like, we're seeing some really bad things. This is not healthy, right? It's not healthy. But we've invested so much time and energy. And I had gone to our coaches and said, here's some of the things that we're seeing. We have concerns. And they basically said, well, those are characteristics of every winning team. Every winning team has those. Maybe, it just wasn't received. So
called gaslighting, by the way.
It's called gaslighting. I did not know that at the time, but that's what it's called. So I said, okay, I want to think about this well. I don't want to be emotional because I was feeling very emotional. There was a lot of turmoil. Like I was having anxiety attacks and all this. Like, what are we going to do?
And here's why it was incredible. This part that she's talking about is so important. Like, it was part of our identity.
Yeah.
Like it 100%, it was part of our identity. So when you question, like the sky is actually not blue, because we've been told for 20 some years that the sky is green, but we can't look at the sky because but we're told that the sky is green. And then for someone to tell us, dude, it's actually blue. Like, no, like just go look at the sky real quick and you'll see, whoa. And then wait a second, right? You have this, you want to talk about a cognitive dissonance. Yeah. I mean, it rocked. I mean, it took us 3 years to detox from 23, 24 years of our identity being one thing. Just explain her intensity.
So what I did, we were getting ready to go to this big conference. And I said, okay, I don't want to be emotional about this. Let me see if I can find characteristics of an emotionally unhealthy environment that I can take with me and view objectively. Let me take them to this conference and view objectively. So I did a search and I said, what are the characteristics of toxic environments or unhealthy or emotionally unhealthy environment, right? And I found this list of 15 things. And I looked at this list and I was like, oh no, we're doing all of them. And so I called him, I read it to him, and I was like, babe, tell me what this sounds like. And he's like, oh, this sounds like the business. I'm like, I know every single one of them. And so what I did is I wrote down the list of all 15 and we went to the conference and I said, okay, so I'm going to listen and pay attention. And every time I hear something being said that falls under one of these 15, I'm going to write it down because I don't want to be emotional about this, right? I don't want to just be in my head and be emotional because this is a really big deal for us. Yeah. And halfway through the weekend, I closed my notebook and I was like, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? Because the things that we're doing are not healthy. They're not good. We have to make a change. Anyways, the time had to come for us to make a decision. Okay, are we going to stay or walk away? And where we were, MLMs are different, right? For ours, there's the company that sells the products, and then there was these training teams. The problem in our MLM didn't come from the company that's selling the products. It came from the training team. And when we went to them to share our concerns, we essentially got told that we had to leave. And we could have fought it, but we just didn't want to. We didn't feel like that was what we needed to do at the time. But we also knew that we couldn't continue being a part of it. Sad, which was really sad because we had invested decades of our life. We had friendships. We had people that we thought we were very close with. And I'll let you guess, out of 20 plus years speaking to thousands and thousands of people, when we just kind of walked away and left, how many people do you think reached out and called and said, hey, what's going on?
I'm going to say nobody. 0.
Well, we got you. There was one. Because there's already a set narrative around people who step out, and you're
bad association. You're negative. You're not part of this anymore. You don't want to be part of that. I have a follow-up question for you on this, though. I have a few follow-up questions. This is fascinating. So you mentioned company versus training team. That is one thing that you and I did talk about before, and I would love for you to hash it out a little bit more, because I mentioned it briefly in my video that the company itself, no matter what the MLM, all right, doesn't necessarily always agree with the training teams within the MLM. It always devolves into this really unethical, manipulative thing. It's very interesting. They know what's going on, but they don't do anything. I'd like for you to kind of hash that out a little bit more for the viewers, because I think that's important.
Yeah. And in ours, I can't speak to all the different MLMs. They all kind of operate a little bit differently. Some of the ones that I have heard of, I know that some of the toxic and manipulation does come from the company itself, right?
Yeah.
They don't have these training teams. Some of them do, some of them don't, right? So they're all a little bit different. Yeah, but for the one that we were in, yes, there is the MLM itself, and then there is the training team that was, trained us in how to build our business and all of that. And so what would happen is the training team would be doing these things, and the company would say, hey, that's not really good, or you're not representing us, well. And so they would, over at different times, they would have these conflicts, and the company would say, hey, you can't say this, or we would get letters saying, hey, here's a list of things you can't say from stage anymore because that's, it's either not good or it's not true. Or they were getting complaints. The company was getting complaints from people about the things that were happening and being taught in the training teams. And they would be like, well, no, you don't have to do any of that stuff to be part of the company. That's just stuff the training team is telling you. And so they go to the training teams and say, hey, you need to stop. And the training team is like, well, that's how we're growing, right? So there was kind of this repetition. And so the training teams would change some and not, but it was this ongoing kind of relationship between the two in terms of how to go about it.
Now, there's another thing that I, in my research, you just mentioned it, but I have my video in 4 parts. Second part is if it's a pyramid scheme. Third part is it a cult, and fourth part is the spiritual. And I believe it's in part 2, where with a lot of MLMs, there's a way to make money that everybody knows, and it has to do with recruitment and the seminars and the trainings, and the product is on the side kind of like as a prop. And I have no qualms really with a lot of the products, but I'm wondering if you could share in the particular MLM that you're in, what was first the way that the company made their money, the number one way, and number 2, what was the number one way that you all made money? How did you get to the top in that regard?
Yeah. So this was another one of the things where they kind of butted heads. So we were in for a long time, right? Like we got started in 1997, and things evolved over time. The primary way that the company wants us to make money is to sell products, right? You want to get customers and sell products, and then you can recruit other people and they get customers and sell products. Well, really what ended up happening is the business people would get in as, join the MLM, and then we just buy it for ourselves and get other people who would buy it for themselves. And the customer side of it was very, very small. And that's not how the company wanted it, but that's kind of how we were taught, because in the business that we were in, there was not a high demand for the products, quite frankly, out on the market, right? There's some MLMs that people are crazy over. They're like, yeah, this stuff is awesome. It's new. It's the latest and greatest. That was not the one that we were in. And so people would try to sell products and they wouldn't be successful, but we even had an answer for that. We would say, well, it's not about the what, it's about the who. Don't worry about the products. It's about who you're connected to, right? So we always had answers for everything, even though they're like, I'm trying to sell these products and nobody wants to buy them. Well, don't worry about it, right? So we would have ways that we would work with it. So, and then the company would come back and they would try to get them to sell more to customers and less, right? But it was always this kind of back and forth thing. So the majority of the way that in the company we were in that people made money was through recruiting and growing their team and getting more people on their team who would buy the stuff and use them. It was a lot of household items. And so, and so that would work.
And so there was an income stream from the manufacturer.
From the main company. Yep.
And there's an income stream from the training team. So the more people that we could, so that we'd have quarterly conferences, seminars, where we would drive to a local, regional kind of area, and we'd have 1,000 people or 5,000 people, whatever. The more those conferences were not put on by the manufacturer, the maker of the products. Those conferences were put on by the training team. And so the more people that we could get at that training team, the more our training team income would be. So we got an income stream for the number of people at the conferences. And there was also their education system, which was a series of it was like basically our training team podcast. And there was a fee for that training team podcast. They also had a fee for the communication platform that was used, an intra communication platform. So there was an income stream that we would get for people at the conferences. There was an income stream that we got from the number of people that were on the education system. Then there was an income stream from the number of people that were on that intra communication platform. Those three income streams were specifically and only from the training team. And then from the manufacturer, it was strictly how much product, how much widgets we could sell. That's where that income came from.
We just worked really hard and grew our business. Like we worked very hard. It's kind of became our whole life. And we grew our business in a certain structure and to a certain size so that we could qualify for the bonuses and to be at that place to make the money.
Why is it hard for other people to do that in an MLM? Because I mean, you gave your whole life to it. There's that. So there's like a price with that. But yeah, big price. But so if in that sense, it's kind of true that people can become as successful as you, why do so many not achieve that status? Why is it 1% in that regard then?
Some of it is based on how it's structured, right? So an MLM, the only way you can hit certain levels is to have so many people underneath you. And so the percentages are just always going to work out that way, right? Does that make sense? Like, if anybody who had X number of people doing X number of volume underneath them is going to hit that level. So the question that you might be asking is, why are some people successful and other people not successful, right? And some of it does boil down to work ethic and putting the numbers in. However, there's actually a lot of people who work very, very hard and they don't see it. And I think that sometimes the people who do very well are really good at these tactics that we've been talking about, right? Because this was one of the hard things, was to train people to, the way that we would say it is to have people skills and to be able to work well with people. I'll translate that. The people who do the best are the best at using these skills that, in our opinion, have turned out to be kind of manipulative. And I'm not calling them manipulators. I'm not doing that because that is not their intention. That is not their heart. But with what I know now, the skills kind of are. And here's the other thing that's really interesting. When you're in an MLM, you're very much told and sold, you own your own business. You're a business owner, right? But I will say this kind of business is not the same as owning a business outside of it. It's not the same. And I have seen so many examples, some of my own family members, that they only achieved a certain level of success in this particular business model, but then they go out and they create their own business outside and they're wildly successful, right? So it's not meant for everybody, but we would teach that it's meant for everybody. We would teach, anybody can see it if you want to, if the dream's big enough, then you can be successful enough. And, we would just never say, look, maybe you could be really great doing this, owning a construction company. Like, we just couldn't say that because then they would leave our business, right? So we had to try to keep people in. It's a multifaceted answer to, to this question, but we didn't have the freedom to, to say, why don't you pursue something else? Because then they would leave our team and that would hurt us, right? We're incentivized to keep people in, even if they're not having success for whatever reason, right? They're not having success. So it's a really it's muddy waters a little bit there.
The only thing I would add is so, and I 100% agree, to answer that question kind of in a different way would be fear and consistency. So the reason why more people on our particular team were not maybe as successful as us is just they didn't overcome their fear. Thankfully, I was able to, and they were very inconsistent. And thankfully, I had a stretch where I was ridiculously laser focused and consistent. And I guess the third thing would be I developed my people skills and, again, some control manipulation skills enough to where I could get some very decent results because of my overcoming my fear and the consistency and the repetitions that I was able to get. I was able to hone my skills to get the results. So that would be another thing that I would say.
And speaking of messaging, we are very much told over and over, this is the best business opportunity in the world, right? That was one of the things. This is the best business opportunity in the world. And we never stop to question, well, is it? Is it? Maybe there's other things that we could do that would be great, right? And a lot has changed since 1997 when we got in, and there's lots of other really great business opportunities, not even MLM, right? But that's out there. So it's just interesting to look back on the messaging and the things that drove us and, helped us be successful. For why isn't everybody? Could they be? Maybe. I mean, we said that's what we sold people on, right? That anybody could be successful. Is everybody successful? No. But again, is everybody successful in anything? What percentage of people make it to the NFL, right? What percentage of people make it to the NBA that play basketball and want to play basketball, right? So we would turn it all back around and say, well, 100% of the ones that wanted to, or, so that's kind of where that all comes in.
What kind of price would you pay for that success? Because virtually everybody that I've talked to, even people that are still in MLMs, very confidentially, have shared with me things that, like, drastic things, very horrible things, if I'm honest, that have happened to them, even though they were successful in their MLM. What they had to give up to get there almost cost them everything. And for some people, it was everything. Yeah. Did you have anything like that? Did you have some sort of catastrophe in reaching the success level that you met?
Let me do first, and then you go for this one. So, number one, you lose your identity.
Yeah.
It's almost an expectation that you need to walk, talk, act, think like whoever that financially successful people are in order to get the results that they get. So you get a truckload of cloning. And so I honestly didn't realize who I was and who God made me to be until I didn't start learning that until a few years ago. Again, 3 years after the detox and kind of working through stuff and realizing, man, I have no idea. And because of my people-pleasing addiction as well, that was tied in there, which is exacerbated in those environments. And so identity was a huge thing that a lot of people lose there. And there's a lot of other things, but I'll let her jump into the other stuff.
Yeah. So several things. So one, you're going to lose a ton of sleep, right? The hours that you keep are very difficult. And again, this depends on the company, because some people, we were not building our business online or in social media. For us, it was all done kind of in person. So there's some people who they just do videos and reels and TikToks and stuff, and that's their whole strategy. And there's a price to be paid there. But for us, it was time. We were up late at night, almost every night. We were taught that we needed to be building our business 5 and 6 nights a week. So, we would work our jobs, and then in the night, that's what we would do. There was no price too small to pay. If we needed to drive 12 hours to go do a meeting with somebody, we would do it. And obviously this was in the years before Zoom, right? Because once Zoom came along, we didn't have to do that anymore, but this was before that. There was no limit to how you would serve somebody. The things that we would do, we would do. We were taught the principle of delayed gratification, which delayed gratification is a great principle, right? Yeah. That's fantastic. But sometimes the things that we delayed, we now regret, right? So I missed my brother's wedding because there was a business conference that same weekend. And well, wouldn't you rather, is your brother financially successful? So how can he help you and your family? Why don't you go to the business conference and then you can be the one that's going to rescue your family 10 years from now because you'll be successful with what you learned. With what you learn at that business conference, it'll put you 6 months ahead if you go to the wedding. Here's this whole story. So I skipped my brother's wedding for that. We skipped all kinds of family events and things because we were always able to justify it that in the end, the success that we have will be worth it. And every successful person has to pay a price, right? So do you see how it's true? Like those things are true until it goes too far, until it goes over the line. Another thing that we delayed was starting a family. We had heard stories of people who said, well, we get free before you start your family. So that way now you can spend all your time with your family and don't your kids deserve a free mom and a free dad that don't have to go to jobs every day? And so we did. And I regret that choice because when it came time for us to start having a family, we weren't able to conceive right away, right? There's a window and you don't know that until you start trying, until you have that. And that is one thing that if we could do differently, we would absolutely do differently. We didn't know we were going to have one child and then not be able to get pregnant again after that. And if we had more time, that may have looked different, right? So, and not that I'm blaming because we made that choice. Like ultimately, we're responsible for that choice and we're responsible for that. But we paid a huge price. You pay with your time, you pay with your finances, you pay with your relationships and the things that you say no to. You pay with the, what you're able to do with other opportunities, right? There's an opportunity cost because if you're putting all your time and energy and money into this, there's other things that you can't do, right? So it's a huge price. And honestly, I think most of the time people look at the price and they don't want to pay it. It's too much, or it takes too much of a toll, or their relationship can't take the price that has to be paid. It's a big strain. And again, that's why we want people to be on relationships. But we would vet this in people. And here's what's going to sound crazy, but we had this whole process where we would, from the time that we met somebody, there was this whole series of this was our recruitment strategy, right? There was this whole series of little things that they had to do, maybe hoops they had to jump through, tests that they had to pass for them to qualify to work with us. And what it was teaching us, what we know now is this somebody who is going to let us be their primary influencer in their life in every way? And that's in every area. We were looking for people who would let us be, and these was the words that we used, their primary influencer. And some of the things that we taught is, well, before you do anything for the first time, you better check with your coach. You better check with your mentor. You want to buy a car, you better check with your mentor because you don't want to mess up your finances. You don't want, right? There was just a lot. And so what happens is Dr. Henry Cloud calls it an up-down relationship. It creates, here's your coach and here's you. You are always in this child part of the relationship because before you do anything, you got to check with the parent in the relationship, which is your coach, which of course, why wouldn't you? Don't you want somebody who's more successful with you, telling you, giving you advice? Don't you want to have advice so that you can be successful? And so it keeps you in this relationship. And unfortunately, what that does is it keeps you also in this not grown up state. It keeps you from becoming an adult. Like this is how adult relationships should be. Even with your family, you don't ever need to be in this kind of a relationship. This is how to be a real grown adult. This is how you need to operate with other people. But that's not what we taught. We kept ourselves and kept other people always in this up, down, one up, one down relationship. And that was the dynamic that you maintained. But it was all under the guise of, well, we have a more successful coach. We want to ask because we want wisdom. We got to seek wisdom. We got to seek, mentorship because that's what smart people do. But it's very unhealthy.
So this made me think of this. There are three principles that were preached like the gospel every single conference, in almost every single podcast episode that this organization, the training team, put out. The three most powerful principles are submission, unity, and the power of the spoken word. And so, that like literally gospel, like that every single,
This is how you succeed.
this is how, men always need to be in submission to other men. Women be in submission to your spouse, right? And the concept and principle of submission is where God blesses those relationships, and as long as those relationships are in the proper alignment, right? So to just reinforce what Kathy just got done saying, I better be always in submission, and that, okay, I'm always the kid, and they're always, so whatever they say goes. And of course, they would say check with the coach to get perspective, which was code for permission.
Because if you didn't do what they recommended, now you were said to be out of mentorship.
Out of submission.
Out of submission, out of
It's
mentorship.
interesting how MLMs across the board, all of them that I've researched, all have their own lingo and language. I think it's really interesting that you now teach logic, considering if everybody knew how to think well and think critically, you would be able to ask really good thought-provoking questions and see, oh, something's not right there, and know that, your brain is not the enemy. It's supposed to you're supposed to judge correctly. And how are you supposed to do that if you're not able to practice discernment and judging correctly? And they do the same thing where they'll take, oh, it's discernment to trust me. Don't go on the internet. Don't look up critical information on this movement or on this teacher or this leader or whatever it is. That's practicing discernment, right? So they do kind of the same thing. That's not actually what discernment is. And I just was thinking the whole time how interesting it is that you are a logic teacher now. So
Isn't it funny? And you're right. And that's one of the things that I really hope people get from this is that that's why I didn't want to talk about the companies, is because these things can happen in a church. These things can happen in a ministry. These things can happen in a family, on a job, in a company, right? So if people are aware of the tactics, if they're aware of the signs to be looking out for, you'll catch it. If it's a church, you'll catch it wherever you're at. You're gonna catch it. And yeah, it's so funny how now both of us are doing things because of what we learned. Like, yes, I have a podcast. I teach logic and critical thinking. He teaches emotional intelligence, because so much of the reasons why people can get swept up into these things is because it meets some emotional need that they have, that they don't know that they have.
Yeah.
And they are easily emotionally manipulated. And if you can get some of these things and have awareness in these areas, you're kind of impervious. You start to get impervious to being controlled and manipulated, and you start to you won't ever be in this up-down relationship, and you start to realize, okay, wait a minute, here's what's wrong with this environment. That's not healthy. It's not good. And man, you're right. You slap a little bit of God and Jesus and Bible verses on stuff, and you can get some people to do anything.
Now this is a great segue, because there's so much to talk about with that. Because the whole spiritual aspect here, I always say that if you can convince people that you've heard from God, you can get them to believe in anything. You can get them really afraid. You can shame them real easily. You can make them feel real guilty if they question you. And this aspect was why I did all of this research. It was a lot of fun. Really interesting and intriguing, and I got to meet wonderful people like you guys. And this was the whole thing for me, was I could not believe that MLMs posture themselves almost like a pseudo religion. People call it New Age. It's really not. It's more New Thought. And New Thought postures itself as being Christian, but it's also very secular, because you have and if I could put it in a sentence, the way that I would describe New Thought is it's the positive thinking movement in America with Jesus as its mascot. And, it's like all the books, no matter what MLM it is, you have all these books, you have all the leaders, the same speakers, the same motivational speakers that are throughout MLMs. A lot of them have Christianese in them. That's already all in the other video if everybody wants to check it out. But this is very important, because I think that this is a vein that's not talked about enough in MLMs. But also, I think that what it does is that it really messes up the gospel, our view of God, Christian values and Christian beliefs, theology. I just want to give you guys the floor and tell me anything and everything you want about this particular aspect within your MLM.
So here's one.
Yeah,
So
there's a lot.
our coach went so far, and so for me, that was my jam, right? Jesus was and is my jam. And so again, don't forget the context. Former recovering people pleaser addict, emotionally needy, emotionally codependent, all those different things. So our business coach brought his pastor in to speak at a number of the different conferences. So further legitimizing and validating, well, we are clearly doing the Lord's work, because like this big cheese pastor is speaking on stage at our business conferences. And these are, the pastor is just talking about success principles that come from the Bible. Well, when you put a pastor on a business stage, again, there are some subconscious connections that people make that, oh man, we must, even if they're not Christians, like, okay, well, man, I kind of familiar with the Christian principles and values, like, okay, this has to be a good thing, right? So again, further lowering their walls and making their decision making more emotional and less logical, right? So if they can do that and get somebody out of their logic side of their brain and make it more emotional, our brains by default want to make emotional decisions because they're easier. Emotional, that's our default, is to make emotional decisions. So if the brain can create some pathways, some neural pathways to only rely on emotion and then validate those decisions with some logic, we're not realizing that these are all emotional decisions. But like, I can give you logic, but the decision, the foundation of the decision was an emotional decision. And that's a powerful way and tool to manipulate other people, is, again, throw in a pastor, a religious figure, person, whatever, throw in some in Jesus' name, or even better, man, let me give you some Bible verses. Matthew 6:33, seek first his kingdom. Guys, we are seeking first the kingdom of God. Look at the work right? So you start using some verses out of context. And again, I have done it. I have perverted God's word for the again, unbeknownst to me, it wasn't intentional, right? It wasn't, I had no EQ. I had no self-awareness. I had no, anyway, so those are just some examples.
The other thing we didn't have language for, it was prosperity gospel. Like, we didn't know what that was, but that's, ultimately what was happening. I didn't know what that was. I had gone to Bible school, for college, but I didn't know. I don't even think we had that language yet, prosperity gospel, for what was happening. Maybe we did. I didn't have it. But there was a ton of that in there. There was the name it and claim it, right? All those things. And if there was a motto, it should have been the mug, I can do all things, through a verse taken out of context, right? Because that's what we did. Sprinkle some
ask, believe, and you receive.
Right. And we were using that for our business. I'm believing for 6 new business owners, right, to come on my team. So that was very much a part of our experience. And I don't know if it's that way for everybody, but the whole spirituality part was a huge draw, because like Noble said, it lowers your defenses. It makes everything sound good, and you can make things sound good, and you can make things sound justified when you do that. And if we don't know scripture, if we're not grounded with what it actually says and what it actually means, all those things are very, very convincing. And it's also easy to lay a good guilt trip on somebody using scripture. Like, I can guilt you to do just about anything and do it with the Bible.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
And that happens. Unfortunately, it happens. But we would always balance it because look at all the good. Look at all the people who got saved.
Yes. And that's always so interesting too, because a lot of people think that that's fruit. And I have
Yeah.
a video on that, by the way, for anybody that wants to know what real good spiritual fruit is, because they think all numbers are good. Like all numbers are good, right? This is my whole, well, not my whole beef, but part of the issue with seeker models for churches is that they think all numbers are good numbers. And that's fruit. That's good fruit. And it's just not, it's so much more nuanced than that. Did you ever have anything? I want to talk more about the mindset, the positive mindset that was really drilled into your guys' head, because that is so much part of the prosperity gospel and the word of faith movement is what you speak will determine your reality, right? It's they believe in a lot of MLMs in this regard, whether they're Christian or not. I've noticed this is on a secular level too. That manifestation happens when you can create your reality, right? You don't discover reality, you're creating it. And that's throughout the word of faith movement. And the kingdom mindset and the positive minded mindset are almost like used interchangeably. Was that ever anything that you guys dealt with in as far as language, that you had to have a kingdom mindset?
No, with the group that we were in, it wasn't about the kingdom mindset. It wasn't about like I don't even couldn't even describe to you word of faith and all that what you mean by that.
Mhm.
However, did we do that stuff?
Yeah.
Oh yes, we did. So, affirmate words of affirmation, right? The things that you say, not words of affirmation, but saying your affirmations, creating affirmations, saying it. How many times we taught people to write their goals on a 3x5 card and stick it on your steering wheel, stick it on your bathroom mirror. And how many times can you say it? Right? How many times can you say over and over and over again your goals, what your next level is, what you want to achieve? Because what that's going to do is going to make your brain get it. It's just, speak it into existence. Oh, we were absolutely taught all those things.
We thought that was a Christian concept.
Yeah, of course,
Yeah.
because
Genesis chapter 1.
God spoke and created.
That's word faith. They believe that you have the same creative power that God does when you're born again. Yeah.
No, we were taught that, and we read books on that, and we read books that the power of. You just did a post on this. The power of life and death is in the tongue.
Oh yeah.
Right. You're like, no, just don't be a jerk.
And it's so interesting to me how there's always that overlap, and it's more than just word faith. It's new thought, and what people don't realize is that a third of what makes up word faith is new thought. And so I say I'm an ex-New Ager, and it's partially true. But I'm like, I was 80% New Thought, maybe 20% New Age. Like there's still things in the New Age that I'm like, that's New Age. I didn't even know what Reiki was, but all that I knew all of that. I knew affirmations. I knew I am statements. I knew all those scriptures. And I never even knew what word of faith was or anything like that, but it was metaphysical Christianity. And so when I saw all these same scriptures, same things being said, same things being taught, exactly the same way, like a cookie cutter in like a lot of charismatic churches, I'm like, what is happening? What is this? Oh, that's the word faith movement. Oh, we need to talk about this, guys, And so there's that element there. But that's why it's also very secular, is that anybody hearing this, maybe you're not Christian, I guarantee that you've heard of these things: manifestation, law of attraction, the secret, power of positive thinking. All these things are within society. And I just find it very interesting that it could be secular, but it's Christianized, and it's within MLM specifically.
It's 100% where we learned it, and what we were told and what we would say is, well, every success principle comes from the Bible. Right? Because ultimately it originates with God. And so even if we would read a book that would have been New Age-ish, well, they just kind of took our principles and are using it, but it ultimately comes from the Bible, because here, look at this verse.
Let me go ahead and pivot a little bit with anything that you guys want to share for my audience with MLMs, with the model, things that they should know. Just tell me what's on your heart with that.
I'll start and then I'll let you go. I think the biggest thing that I want people to know is that for the most part, in my experience, what I've observed is that the people who are doing these are really genuine. Like, they're not out trying to scam you. They really truly believe that they have something that's going to help you.
Most of them.
Most of them. There are some that are just in it for themselves, and they are truly manipulating. They know they are, right? That's just kind of how it goes. However, the majority of the people really and truly felt like they had a way to help, felt like what they were doing was helpful, whether they believed it on their own, were told that and believed it, whatever, but they were coming with good intentions. And I just want to say that because I feel like sometimes people who are in MLMs can get a bad rap as though they're trying to be manipulative. And most of them, I don't think they are. Most of them were like us, where we were genuinely had a heart for people, and we didn't know that we were doing these things that were hurtful. We did not know that we were hurting people. And there have been many conversations that since we kind of walked away, and we still order products because whatever, the company, we have no beef with the company. It's fine. I don't have a problem with them. They're just selling products, right? But we've had many conversations with people where we have had to apologize. And we said, look, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the way this affected you. I'm sorry for the way we treated you. I'm sorry that when you left, we blocked you on Facebook, like, oh, we're really going to show them because we can't be friends with them anymore if they're going to leave here. I'm sorry. That was terrible. And we've had to go back and apologize. And the beautiful thing is every single person that we've talked to has been so gracious, and they've been like, we know that you were doing this from a good heart, and I got positive things out of it, and my life is better, and thank you. I receive your apology, and I forgive you. But we just didn't know, right? And there's still people that are still so many people that are still in business and building the business that if they were to call us up today, we'd be super happy to talk with them, right? We're not angry. We're not like trying to diss anybody. But we walked away from money. We did a podcast episode, why we blew it all up at the age of 45, which is a terrible time in life to blow things up and have to start all over again, because we just knew that we couldn't do it anymore. We just knew that with what we knew now, we couldn't do it. And our heart is just to help people to be able to be healthy and be in healthy environments regardless of what it looks like. And so there might be some people watching this who knew us. There might be some people watching this who are currently in a business and they think that we're crazy. And no, that's not us, because that's what we would always say. Well, that's other teams. That's other people. We're not doing that, right? I would just encourage you to look into what is healthy behavior and what's not, and be sure you're not doing it that way, right? Because ultimately that is not the foundation you want to build a business on. And then I would say to the people who are watching this who have been hurt in an MLM, I want to validate your experience. Yeah, that was real. That was real. And you probably did experience a lot of really toxic treatment and environment. And I'm sorry you experienced that. But I want to validate your experience, that because I think I asked him for probably 2 years straight, every single day, are we crazy? Are we crazy? Are we crazy? Because I'm like, how are we seeing this and nobody around us is seeing this? It makes you feel crazy. And I'm not crazy. And I know that now. I don't ask that question anymore. But I did, because we believed it so much. We really, really did. And so we have had to have a lot of those conversations, and everybody has been very gracious to us.
Yeah. So there's money. So here's some thoughts that I'd like to share. How would the leaders in your respective organizations respond to asking genuine questions about how the organization is run?
Ooh, it's a good question.
And if there's any defensiveness, guilt, shame, fear, condemnation, control, manipulation, gaslighting, that should be a monster red flag. The organization that we were a part of You couldn't question your business coach. They could tell you that you could question them, but they actually didn't mean it, because it would be spun back to making you feel like an idiot somehow. And you definitely couldn't question how the organization ran or did stuff, or, hey, could you kind of give me some insight to how some of the decisions are made behind the curtains? Oh, well, what you could, once you earn this level of business, then you can be a part and kind of understand how some of those decisions are made, or that kind of thing, right? Once you earn the right to learn that knowledge or get access to that kind of knowledge. So are you able to question or not? Next one is, are the leaders in the organization pedestalized? That's how I'll say that, right? That's a new word, right? How much are the leaders in an organization put on a pedestal? The organization that we were a part of, and we would say they are masters of edification, which is code for they are masters for putting people on pedestals, thus creating a greater amount of authority and control in a person's life, and therefore idolized, and therefore followed almost implicitly, again, without question and without use of the brain. Which, again, it doesn't just happen in MLMs. This happens in companies. You don't question the CEO. You don't question the president. You don't question the pastor. You don't question the elders in a church, whatever, right? So that's not just an MLM specific thing. Next one. How are non or poor performers treated? So are they blackballed? Are they ostracized? Are they isolated? Are they socially outcast? What happens to poor or non-performers would be another great question to kind of just ask yourself. Look objectively, look to your left or right. How have folks been handled in the past? Next thing, what is the written or unwritten SOP, standard operating procedure, rule for communicating with ex or previous members of that organization? Is it encouraged? Is it discouraged? Does it matter? Right? In our organization, we were highly, strongly encouraged, persuaded, dissuaded from communicating with anybody that was leaving or had left the organization for didn't matter what the reason was. You don't talk to people that have left or are leaving. They have lost their vision. They've lost their dreams. There's no need to surround yourself with negative. Let them live their life. Unfortunately, they probably will not be successful anymore in life, right? Because they're no longer part of the organization. So how are poor or non-performers treated? Next one. How or what kind of boundaries do you have in place or are encouraged by or within the organization, if any? So the organization that we were a part of, your business coach had access to literally every single area of your life. And if you did not give them access to any of those areas, you would receive some form of guilt, shame, fear, control, manipulation, condemnation, gaslighting. Melissa, I thought you and your husband wanted to be successful. Like, I'm just kind of surprised that, you told me a month ago that you guys wanted to be financially independent. I mean, if I'm not kept in the loop with how your marriage is doing, your finances, like, how am I going to be able to help you?
No, we didn't know anything about boundaries in this.
Right. I literally had never heard the word boundaries outside of a military context until 5 or 6 years ago, prior to this growth journey. So boundaries were non-existent in our organization. Next one. is strongly, strongly encourage whatever, if you're in an MLM, not in an MLM, you know someone in an MLM, just, because again, we are trained to be very defensive, or we are all trained on how to respond to objections or haters. So this is what I would encourage someone who may be deep eyeballs into an MLM that may be unhealthy, is encourage them to grow their emotional intelligence and their ability to think. Just, hey, work on self-awareness. Just what are some tools, some resources that you can do to start growing your EQ, your emotional quotient, your emotional intelligence? And the first starting place that I coach executives on and leaders in now is growing their self-awareness, because most leaders, most people are not as self-aware as they think they are. And so by helping grow your self-awareness, and another part of that of your EQ is social awareness, start growing those tools, because they will help in being able to evaluate and assess more intelligently about the world around you. So that would be, those are some things that I would recommend or think about.
That's really good. I might even make a short clip of that. I'm assuming that a lot of people watching might be asking a question that I think, Kathy, I asked this of you when we first talked, and that, is it possible to be a part of an MLM in a healthy way? Like, can it be done in an ethical way?
I think it can. I do. Some of it is going to depend on the company itself. Is the company structured? The company itself, their compensation plan, in a good way. Some of them are structured as straight up pyramids, right? And they come and they go, right? The MLM, we've been in this industry for a long time, right? The MLM train, they come and they go, they come and they go. There's been some that have come and we've been like, well, that's going to last all of 2 years, and it lasts all of 2 years, right? So, but most people don't know that. They don't know how to look at a compensation plan and say, okay, well, is this legitimate or is this not? So that's one that it looks at. The second one is to look at who you're going to be, who's teaching you, who's training you, and what are the tactics that they're using, and is there unhealthy stuff happening? We have seen some organizations that are healthier than others. We've seen some that are more toxic than others, right? So we've seen a scale of some that are really bad, some that are...
Call it the MLM spectrum. That's what I call it. Yeah.
Exactly. So theoretically, is it? Yes, I do think it is. I don't know all of them, obviously. So maybe there's some amazing ones out there that are incredible and they're doing great things and it's totally healthy. Most of the ones I've seen are not that, but that doesn't mean that it can't be. And here's why. Again, because this stuff works. And when you're in an MLM, you're so desperate for it to work. You just want the thing to work, right? You want to make money. You want your team to grow. You want to be successful. You want to get all those dreams that you put on the refrigerator. And so you're so desperate for it to work that if you find something, oh, that's working, do more of it. And you don't even stop to evaluate, well, should I do more of it? Ought I do more of that? Was that a healthy thing to do? Was that kind of manipulative and controlling? There's no thinking of that. It's just, well, that worked, right? You read Win Friends and Influence, How to Win Friends and Influence People one time, and you're like, well, I got this. If this is what's going to do it for me, I'm all in because I have good intentions, right? We judge ourselves based on our intentions rather than based on the effect that it's having on other people. And so that would be my caveat. And that's why we just wanted to share is, okay, maybe you can. Absolutely. Here's what that doesn't look like so that you can be aware of it. Yeah.
And here's another, this is a fire thought here. So I go around and speak to people, right, about emotional intelligent leadership. And this has been fascinating. I ask leaders in every organization I go into, what percentage of their leaders that they've ever had in their organizations have been toxic leaders. And that, shockingly to me, I was no joke, I was surprised. The number ranges between 30 to 75%. That's a massive number That's a massive number. So here's my point in saying that. What percentage of people have ever been trained in the United States of America, you could also argue the globe, let's just talk about the US, have been trained how to think and how to process and manage our own emotions? I was a public school guy. I never learned how to do logic. I never learned how to acknowledge, identify, process, and manage my emotions or the emotions of other people. So you have very emotionally unhealthy people walking around in every organization that there is. And you have emotionally unhealthy people that don't know how to think in churches. You have emotionally unhealthy people that don't know how to think in corporate America. You have emotionally unhealthy people that don't know how to think in every MLM out there. So is it possible to do an MLM in an emotionally healthy way? I think so. But I would argue that somewhere in there, you're going to run into some emotionally unhealthy people that don't know how to think, that are great, that have great work ethics, that are probably somewhere in the leadership of those organizations. So can it be done? Yes. You just got to be aware of those that don't.
Yeah. All right. No, thank you guys so much for sharing all of that. Kathy, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned the 15 things that kind of made you wake up. I'm wondering if you could tell my viewers where they could find that at.
Yes, we are actually doing a podcast episode on those. We're going to put it on both of our podcasts. So if you go to, mine is Filter It Through a Brain Cell is the title of the podcast. And it's going to be episode 237. For Nobles, it is EQ Gangster. It is episode 453. It's so funny. I teach logic and critical thinking, and my husband teaches about emotions and feelings. Go figure, right?
That's funny. That is funny. That's kind of backwards.
Yeah.
And all of this, by the way, guys, all their socials, websites, whatever, Instagram, all of it will be in the description for you guys to check out. So if you didn't catch all that, you don't have to write it down. It'll be in the description below. Noble, did you want to add anything to that?
No, well, other than I'm on both YouTube and YouTube and any podcast platform.
Great. Guys, this has been wonderful. I could easily be here with you guys for another hour or more. I'm so funnily interested in this topic. But I just want to thank you guys for coming on, kind of putting yourselves out there, sharing your stories in a very graceful but firm and fair way.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa, for what you do. It's been awesome connecting.